Hello from Las Vegas, my friends. I wish you were here. I hope you are here. Maybe you are here. It's PodJam this week, and I am in Las Vegas recording this opening on my iPhone. Sorry for the low quality if you even notice, but don't let that take away from today's guest, the author of School Moms, Parent Activism, Partisan Politics, and the Battle for Public Education. Laura Pappano joins me. Very excited to have this veteran journalist who's won all kinds of awards, been involved with all kinds of writing and journalism initiatives throughout her career, highly respected author and journalist. And this is such an important book exploring how public schools across the country, as I've been telling you about in my town, have become ground zero in this cultural and political war. It's the first book of its kind to address the rise of parent activism, the politicized battle for control over public schools. And it is such an important book, and I think a great conversation. As always, I can't do it without you. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. I hope to see you at PodJam this weekend here in Las Vegas. If you're not here, we're thinking of you. We'll share it all with you, and hopefully we'll see you next time. But right now, it's time to get to my conversation with Laura Pappano, so let's do it. There she is now, and she comes so highly recommended. Laura, it's an honor to talk to you. I think the work that you're doing is so important. I hope it wins all the awards and gets all the attention, because everybody needs to read your works. Thank you so much for joining me and for doing the work you've been doing for your whole career.
Thank you for having me. And this isn't about me. This is about us having this conversation and having it over and over with more and more people.
Exactly. But it is about the journalism that you and a few others are doing. Not nearly enough people are doing. You have covered this movement. You've covered education for most of your career, but specifically, you've been covering this movement, the far right extremists. And I wonder if you could just start with how you've seen covering education change with this extremist movement.
Absolutely. I've been covering education for over 30 years, K-12 and higher ed. And what I spent a lot of my career writing about how we're learning to read or not learning to read, or math, and what about the inequalities in school funding, digging into really, what some people would find really dull stuff, to find the gems in there that explain what's happening to everyone. But what I saw happening around the country involves schools, but it wasn't about education. And I think that's where we are now. And that's why I felt compelled to write this book.
If it's not about education, what's it about?
What it is, the far right is using public schools, which have been nonpartisan spaces. I never knew what other people's politics were when I went to school, or when I was a PTO mom for my kids. I didn't know, and it didn't matter. It just did not matter. But the far right has recognized that public schools are a platform for gaining power. And you heard, Steve Bannon make that point at CPAC 2 years ago when he said the school boards are the key that picks the lock. And what he's talking about, and he said, we will take over school by school, district by district, town by town. And that when you control schools, you control everyone. Schools touch everyone. Public schools touch everyone.
They've gotten people that weren't normally interested in my town and towns across America interested. School board elections are usually poorly attended. The meetings are poorly attended. The elections are poorly participated in. People just don't. We moved here because they had great schools. We left New York. We moved to the suburbs. Great schools. We weren't thinking about the board. We thought a bit about demographics. But we mostly looked at the statistics. Great school district. New York State, great state for education. So we wanted to stay in New York. Never went to the board meetings for the first several years that we lived here. Never thought about it. And then, wow, over the last few years, starting with the pandemic, then CRT, just as you write about, like the chapters of your book, I live them in my town, Laura. But take me to what sparked it in your mind, in your reporting.
I think COVID, obviously, what COVID did is it allowed these issues, let's back up from one moment, are not brand new. I saw these surface when I was covering sex ed in the 1990s, right after AIDS education. AIDS happened, we had to change sex education. So we had to use words like homosexuality and condom. And that brought out a lot of far activism at that time. It didn't gain a lot of traction. And that was on the heels of stuff in the late 1980s and the late 1970s. But what we're seeing now, most recently, what you rightly recognize, is COVID. COVID allowed people who are upset about things. First of all, was COVID good for anybody? I don't think so. So as a result, it was hard for everyone. It was highly emotional. And this was an emotional reaction to people's frustration. So you go to the school board meeting, you're all riled up, and guess what? You find fellow travelers who are also all riled up. And it was a way in which people who were unhappy about things found each other and just found a whole group of people who were willing to be taken along on this journey that has morphed into other things. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the seed of it, certainly recently, was COVID. But all of that discontent was there. And as you recognize, we have lost that ability to just trust that everything's going to be okay and we can count on our fellow citizens to just do the right thing.
My reaction, I felt alone in my reaction. I don't know. I think I don't want to toot my own horn, but I do think I'm a particularly compassionate person. And my mom was a public school teacher. And so when it comes to school, when COVID happened, I just remember having so much compassion for even the superintendent, the board, the administrators, and the teachers, all of them, because in no master's course do they teach how to administer a pandemic. What do you do when there was no education? There was no one with experience. Everybody was just trying to figure it out. We didn't know how dangerous it was. And I just had so much compassion for all the administrators, whereas everybody else was screaming about masks or when to close school. I didn't know what was best to do. I don't know how kids learn best. So I just gave a lot of my trust over. But as you're saying, a lot of people obviously hated it. And I think it comes down in a lot of ways to control. Can you pick up on that or no?
Certainly. One of my daughters is a school principal in Dallas. And she was
Congratulations.
Yeah, it was a hard job. And she was an assistant principal during COVID. And I remember how hard she worked and how she would show up in person to hand out food to cars that would come by, even when kids were not in school, and how she worried about kids who were just AWOL. She was concerned that especially young men were just going off and working construction jobs. So there was a lot of worry and a lot of anxiety for teachers. She's young, she's 29 now, but she had teachers who were older who lost loved ones to COVID. And we forget about that. Now we're all about, we masked too long. We did as you well observed, it was a time where we just didn't know. And we were finding out stuff as fast as we could. Absolutely. The trust piece, we lost that trust piece.
Yeah, we did, of each other and of institutions, unfortunately, in a lot of different ways. I still haven't. I still trust the experts in general and things, which is certainly why I'm excited to be talking with you. But the next chapter in their movement was the reaction to, I think, the Black Lives Matter movement, which was to some extent a reaction to George Floyd. But the Black Lives Matter movement, as I always try to describe it, to maybe it's just a continuation of the civil rights movement. It's just the civil rights movement of our time. It takes all different iterations given the issues. Black Lives Matter, great idea for a phrase, great movement, and it's the struggle. And
we're not there yet.
We're not even remotely there. But and especially because now we've gone 3 steps backwards, getting rid of affirmative action, but you're paying attention to what's happening in education across the country, getting rid of African American history and so on. But in my school, and as you write about, it was this fear about CRT was being taught in our school. They said things like DEI is just code for CRT. And I interviewed all of the principals and teachers, many, I should say, off the record. And I simply asked them, are you teaching it? No one knew what they were talking about. Nobody knew, Laura, what they were screaming about. These parents were screaming about CMT. It activated and ran their whole campaign. And nobody knew what they were even talking about within the schools. But it was
or SEL.
Social and emotional learning. Don't teach that. Don't teach that.
Won't teach it. So I did a story that was out in December in Vanity Fair and for Hechinger Report on North Idaho. And I was on the ground for a school board election in November there, where far right candidates were running on a platform of transgenderism. And they had no English language arts curriculum for going on 2 years because it contained SEL. And I had an hour-plus conversation with one of the campaign managers, and we were going around and around the SEL. And I said, what is SEL? And he kept calling it ESL. And I said, no, like SEL. And then he finally said, we don't know what it is, but we don't like it.
Right.
We could say the same thing that you're bringing up around CRT. If we look at how CRT became CRT, the kind of boogeyman that we talk about now, that was Chris Rufo. And he very boldly talks about on Twitter how he was creating a brand that everyone would hate. And interestingly enough, a year ago, he proposed doing the same to DEI that he did for CRT. And guess where we are now?
He's been successful.
The president said to me 2 weeks ago, DEI is a new CRT.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No doubt about it. And it's doing tremendous damage, obviously, in a lot of different ways. But they're running on these things. And one of the things that you really interestingly and professionally and did in such an effective way is you actually reported on the Moms for Liberty organization. You went to their conventions. I think a couple of times you basically embedded as a journalist. I guess you weren't hiding, but you also were not, confronting them either. You were there to learn and to report. And it's such important reporting, and not nearly enough people did that. What did you learn, and where is that movement now? And why aren't we talking about the Dads for Liberty? That's what I'm dealing with. A bunch of crazy guys, mostly.
The Moms for Liberty Summit, as soon as I registered for it, and you're right, I wasn't trying to hide. I registered under my name, but I also did dress to fit in. I brought a red blazer, and I bought myself an American flag pin that I pinched into the lapel, and I did buy 2 T-shirts. But I went to Tampa and went to the Marriott there, and I go to check in, and the woman at the desk whispers that, "We're with you. I'm with you." And she said, "I'm upgrading you all." So suddenly I find myself in a high floor with a water view. What was interesting about the timing of the event was that at the very same moment, kitty corner to the Marriott is a Tampa Convention Center, which was hosting Florida's largest anime gathering.
It's amazing. So, amazing.
I was like, as a journalist, I could not believe my good luck. So here I am with all of these people with blown out hair and heels in Florida screaming at me. And then on the one hand, and then I walk outside and we've got wigs and horns and glitter and colonial garb. And it was just the strangest juxtaposition you could imagine.
The Moms from Liberty must have been like, it's a groomer convention.
It was so funny. I think they did not know what to make of it. And you just saw.
See, you can be anything now. You can change you want to be called a cat? You can be a cat. You can be a cartoon character. See?
Oh, watch out. You'll need a litter box.
I know all about it. About it.
Crazy stuff.
Yep.
As a journalist, though, I was like, you know what? I've been in a lot of situations over the course of my career where it's not really about what I think personally. It's what's the logic here? Does this make sense? What is the flow of the argument? And I go into the 4 days of the Moms for Liberty. Within the first half hour, I was just flabbergasted. I was stunned. I said, this doesn't make any sense. I am hearing that sending your child to public school for 30 to 35 hours a week is like sending them to a Maoist reform prison camp. That social emotional learning is a form of Marxist indoctrination. It was so outlandish that it was hard to wrap my head around. And then I started really looking at what was going on. And I realized that as a fan of theater and a former regional theater board chair, I was like, this is an elaborate production. What I'm seeing here, the costumes, the outfits, the language, are taking these about 500 moms, there are a few dads, but mostly moms, on this kind of crazy journey. And the messaging was that your children are in grave existential danger.
That's what I hear at my board meeting. Yep.
And when that happens, there's this kind of emotional trigger response, which is exactly the point, right? You want an emotional reaction. You don't want a logical, does this make sense reaction? And all of the messaging throughout the 4 days was that you may not be comfortable as moms stepping out, speaking up, but your children are at risk, so you must.
Exactly. And it is so motivating. And I can see the motivation, and it's terrifying. They're motivated right now, specifically forgive my language, but this is exactly what they're saying in one way or another. I don't want boys going into the girls' restroom and taking their penises out.
Okay, were you in Idaho? Because that's exactly what I heard.
I was at my last board meeting, and you know who said that? 11-year-old. I don't want to see they had an 11-year-old at the microphone, and parents as well. I don't want my child to see male genitalia, and that's what they're afraid of. And
so my point is that's national. What we're seeing is we're seeing national language, national talking points repeated at the local level, whether they apply or not. And usually they don't.
They almost never, these scenarios that they paint all the time that are, I asked my daughter, have you ever seen another girl naked or even topless? She goes, I guess I've seen girls in their bras. But they don't change in front of each other. The locker rooms have curtains. Like, it's so much different than when we were.
And I was in school.
But it's the law. Like, it's the law. Yeah. What they've done here is they've lied to the community and said that the board changed the bathroom. No, it's New York State law, but they've convinced people that it's the board. They're demanding that they resign. And it's really hard to combat them on this one. The race issues, surprisingly, I think, were a little easier to some extent. It was a little bit more clear cut. We've seen this fight before. But on LGBT issues, and I'm surprised that we're here, but when they start talking about, as I said, that being a threat, they really motivate people. And I got to say, at this point, and our election is in May, we're getting our ass kicked by their message. And I'm pretty stuck. We don't know what to do. We've got great candidates that we're running. They're educators, but we have people in the town calling those educators, women, all of them who have been teaching combined 75 years. They're calling them child abusers.
Yeah, I know. It's horrific. We have, what is so distressing about this whole business is that what we're doing is we're taking the very people who have for all of the history of public schools been the advocates, the caretakers, the educators. We are denigrating them and vilifying them in ways that are just unconscionable. And the problem is I often find myself saying, no, schools do not collect, or school libraries do not collect pornography. Teachers are not trying to change the gender of your child. They're not trying to brainwash them with Marxist indoctrination. But I am increasingly finding that there's a kind of just repentant anger that we end up confronting over and over again. And I think that I'm starting to feel that we need to take the emotion out of it because the emotion is what gathers people into these screaming groups. And I think we do all want to remember a time and a place when school was a place where you got to meet and be with other people who are not like you. And one of the mom advocates who has been very successful in Central Bucks, PA, she said something that has just stuck with me. And she said, start from this point, she said, where we all believe that everyone deserves to be who they say they are. Now, that to me is a very welcoming, opening kind of statement. And yet it does some work at countering these negative attacks. The attacks are just, they're unhinged. And I think increasingly the far right leaders, we can look at Trump in Ohio, right? They're unhinged. The idea that if he loses, there's going to be a whole lot of the bloodbath and that. Right. Yeah. We're getting to the point where the language is becoming more and more extreme and less tethered to logic. And I think that there's a time to call it down and call it out as being as unhinged as it is. Yeah, but it's so hard. And I want to, for the board members, for someone to run for board, the threats, even if it's not a threat, the reputational harm that is done to you. I've been called a pedophile, sexual abuser, everything. And it's hard because more than anything else, primarily in my life, people who know me obviously know that I'm more than anything else a dedicated father. If anything too involved, my 16-year-old would tell you now, like, all right, I got it. Thank you. But the point, one of the few dads at the PTA and so on, always been dedicated to them and put them first in my mind. And I'm happy to do it. It's been no burden. They've been a pleasure. So to be called then someone who hurts children, it's terrible. It's really, and it's bad for your business. It's the worst thing you can call someone. And they all do it now
flippantly simply because and for all the wrong reasons. And it's very hard to combat, especially now you've done reporting on that they have some big groups and big money behind them. At my board meeting now, students and adults handing out, I should say it's exclusively students, handing out Turning Point buttons. Libs from TikTok has touted our board meeting as the most hateful anti-gay person in all of social media potentially. And so they have, I don't know if they have money, but you've covered this, Patriot, the cell phone company, and other groups, like I said, Turning Point.
Is Patriot Mobile coming to your school?
No.
Okay.
I just read your reporting on that. I think I want to think that's a Texas thing.
They showed up. I found out that they were showing up at an event in Idaho, and I was thinking, geez, that was interesting that they were showing up there from Texas. And then they were the major sponsors at the second Moms for Liberty Summit in Philly, which really struck me.
Patriot Mobile is this ostensibly cell phone company out of Texas. Christian cell phone company that donates 5% of their profits to far-right causes, which they list right on their website. And what they did in January 2022 is they formed a super PAC. And as school board races used to be things that we just did with our friends in a Xerox machine. And now Patriot Mobile, then in January 2022, basically created the model for what we're seeing now. And what they did is they spent over $400,000 on 11 school board races and in 4 districts in Texas. And you can do a lot with $400,000. Yeah, I'm wondering what that does in a school board. It's ads that are well done, that are fear-mongering and inundating people with them. I'm not sure how much it makes a difference.
What they were able to do is they were able to hire national strategy. Axiom Strategies out of Kansas City, Missouri, which does work for Ted Cruz and Ron DeSantis and Glenn Youngkin. And then suddenly these flyers, these glossy flyers, and a lot of people sent me those. You know, some of the flyers were really, the cards being the mailers looked like out of World War II, those kind of scare with the shadows and the dark.
Oh, yeah, that's great when you make one of those. When you see your own face in one of those ads and you've done nothing but volunteer on the Board of Education, and all of a sudden you're Satan.
Yes, box trucks driving around the neighborhood. So you think, okay, big deal. The issue is that in some of these school board races, the turnout was 8 and 10%. So people are going in who haven't paid a lot of attention. They're picking the names that they've seen, and those seen, you can buy that with circulars sent to your home.
Right.
And then suddenly somebody loses by 8 votes or 51 votes in Frisco, Texas. It doesn't take a lot to flip a school board. And the consequences, we're seeing the consequences like in a place like Keller, Texas. One thing that I was struck by, I was watching a 5.5-hour school board meeting in Keller after it gone far, and they implemented a new rule for buying library books. Instead of letting the professionals, as we've been talking about, choose the library books, and librarians go through quite a lot of training. I know my husband would think they just stood there and stamped the books.
No, they have master's degrees in New York, at least. Yes, of course. They take that job very seriously. Now it's like Cletus, who's a mechanic, and he's checking all these. Let me read it first. I'm sorry. If anyone like Cletus.
That's exactly what we're talking about. And I was watching a school board meeting at which this far-right school board had decided that for 30 days, every librarians could no longer buy the books. They would have to go to the public, then all be approved by the school board.
Jesus.
And this librarian gets up, and she's got the swirly hair and the glasses, and she says, I cannot get books for my middle schoolers about squirrels or camels or football in a timely manner. I cannot get the latest Diary of a Wimpy Kid or the new Guinness Book of World Records because of this. And she said, I don't tell the kids who are walking up to me saying, why are there no new books in the library? She goes, I don't tell them that it's political.
I do feel I sense some agreement because I think most animals are probably communists. So I don't know if we want really to be learning, or cannibals, for God's sake.
We certainly don't want to be learning, about cats or dogs or squirrels.
No, because then we might want to become one of them and be called a squirrel. There does seem to be a delta, if you will, of change to some extent, where some of these extremists have been elected to school boards, and then the school grinds to a halt. Or they have no idea what they're doing on the school board, dealing with budgets and some pretty boring issues and funding and resources and often vulnerable. Yeah, and so what you're seeing is school districts have a lot of problems and losing funding in a lot of ways. And in my race right now, the three people that they've put up against our educators, all who have master's degrees, two of which have been on the board for years, they put up a New York City police officer, they put a firefighter, and then these other people who are tangential to education, but they're really extremists. They were the people at the meeting that were screaming, all of these people, and they'll have no business being on the board. The point I'm trying to make is sometimes these people get on the board, these extremists, and they ruin everything, and then we're able to take back and have some civility. Where do you think they're at? Is that an actual thing that is happening? They win, and then they lose everybody with their antics and their lack of understanding of how shit works.
I think we're in the middle. What you're saying, I think we're in the middle of all that right now. Meaning we saw in Central Bucks 2 far-right Moms for Liberty resign. There is real work that has to be done in school that may not be why these people, and certainly if you look at their campaigns, that's not what they're talking about when they're running. So I think the real challenge is to remind people what the real work is. Do I think it's turning? I think there is a growing but too slow awareness of the consequences of this, because there is funding to deal with. There are mental health issues. There are so many things. And then on top of it, what we haven't discussed is the role of the legislatures and how that's piling on top. So school boards really matter. I think people are starting to realize that, but I don't think they're very all in on discerning what that means.
One thing I know I wanted to ask you is and I'm not sure if you wrote about it because I haven't gotten through School Moms, and I can't wait to finish it and have you back on and talk more about it. But seemingly the movement is changing quickly, of course. But I've covered this Christian nationalist movement. Those are the words I like. I've talked to, I think, oh my gosh, every expert, scholar, journalist, commentator, pundit about this issue for years now. Really, I've been talking with people about it. What overlap do you see with religion, specifically that Christian nationalist theme? Because it's certainly at play when it comes to all of the LGBT stuff and the kind of the misogyny and the authoritarian stuff and just the long movement to destroy public education. You're seeing these Supreme Court decisions about prayer in school and so on. Do you see a lot of overlap with that movement?
What I'd say is that this has been going on for a very long time. It started I think Jerry Falwell was the key guy. He was the guy who recognized that we don't just want to draw believers to us, but we want to impact institutions. We're on a mission. We're on a mission that is outside of the church. So they very effectively, starting the late 1980s, changed their language from one about prayer in school to students' rights. Same thing. Students have the right to pray. And that's where we first hear most recently about parents' rights.
Oh, I know.
It's that kind of language switch using a more kind of liberal daily language that we're used to using. This has been going on for a long time, but certainly most recently in the Christian nationalism, I hesitate to think of it as religion, because if we really look at what religion and the roles of, there are many Christians who are saying what's going on here is really not rooted in the kind of tenets of religion.
Right.
This is rooted in, it's a political movement that is religious, that is using religion as a tool for gathering people. But it's not at its heart really religious.
Finally, just got to ask you, as you write at the end of the book about solutions, and if you have any people that I should talk to that are doing the work, then let me know.
Well, you're doing the work, and you probably, this is where, that's the front line, are parents who are standing up uncomfortably in meetings and speaking up. Organizing,
knocking on doors, doing the work, and working with teachers and doing whatever you can to get involved. And reading your book and following your journalism, Lori, it's been an honor to talk to you, and I will definitely catch up with you and talk to you again. I really appreciate it. Congratulations on an amazing career, and this new book is so good. Thank you for talking to me.
Thank you for what you're doing.
And there you go, Laura Pappano. Go get her book, School Moms, and thank you for your support, for listening today. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Not sure what time it's going to get up because we're going to be partying out here in Las Vegas, but I will get it up. The episode, that is. What am I talking about? I love you guys. John Carroll, live, Saturday night, taking us out today and every day. When the tyrants taunt you and the sirens teach you, better stand up, let the brave meet the
you better stand up. Stand up. When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up off of your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well